Bienvenue à la réunion numéro.
Welcome to meeting number 7 of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans.
That we're gathered on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people and express gratitude that we're able to do the important work of this committee on lands that they've stewarded since time immemorial. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is meeting to continue its study on the attribution of redfish quotas and exploratory lobster fishing licenses, and this is the last meeting that we have scheduled for this study. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule.
Today's meeting is unfolding in a hybrid form. In compliance with the standing orders, members can participate in person or through the Zoom application.
Before we continue, I would like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, but particularly our interpreters. You'll also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. Pursuant to our routine motions, I would like to advise committee members that all witnesses appearing virtually today have conducted the required technical testing. And I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. En ce qui concerne l'interprétation, pour ceux qui...
As for interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen between the floor, English, and French. For those who are in the room, you can use the earpiece and choose the channel of your choice.
Through the chair. Pour les députés présents dans la salle.
For members present in the room, if you wish to take the floor, please raise your hand. And for the clerk and I will do our best to maintain the speaking order. And we thank you for your patience.
Our witnesses, we have Camille Gagné, capitaine propriétaire d'exploitant. We have on a Jean Latin.
We have Jean Lantaigne, directeur général, Fédération régionale acadienne des pêcheurs professionnels, by video conference.
Vice President, Sustainability and Engagement, Ocean Choice International. Et avec ça, nous avons commencé avec les...
We will begin with the preliminary statements by the witnesses for 5 minutes or less, beginning with Ms. Gagné. You have the floor. Hello to all committee members. My name is Camille Gagné, former captain, owner, and operator of a commercial fishing business in Quebec. I say former because for several years now I have nothing to fish. I'm in debt and I'm no longer able to make a living from my profession. I'm speaking today in a personal capacity in an effort to shed light on the shortcomings I have experienced with the aim of preventing such things from happening again for the sake of future generations. To avoid making the same mistakes, it is important to look at the facts of the past. Here is my story. I have worked in the fishing industry all my life. In the spring of 2020, I acquired my own core license for herring and mackerel, and then in the autumn of that same year, a crab license, quotas and vessel. In the winter of 2021, the crab quota was reduced to 30%. The landing price was good, so despite this decrease and with the mackerel fishery, I ended the year with a small profit. Then, a few weeks before the 2022 fishing season, I learned that my crab quota had been reduced to 19%. What's more, 2 days before the season opened, the herring and mackerel fishery was officially closed, without notice and without consultation. DFO told us that this was not a moratorium, but it was for an indefinite period. Having no other choice, because debts and payments are agreements that must be respected, I went crab fishing. That year, there were as many lobsters as crabs in my traps, and in some places there were only lobsters. We notified our associations and reported to Fisheries and Oceans that the situation was not normal. Lobsters scare away crabs, and these two species are not supposed to be found at the same depths. We asked to be allowed to keep these bycatches to protect our crab and help us financially. This was categorically refused. The annual balance sheet was negative, and last year's surplus was ultimately used to pay off my debts. In the winter of 2023, my crab quota remained at 19%. With no other choice but to find a way to survive, I took on every small contract I could find. For one of these contracts, I became involved in the reconciliation process and became a training vessel for a First Nation in my region. The intention was to share the snow crab fishing trade with young people from a First Nation who were struggling in school in a positive setting. We once again raised the alarm and asked about the presence of lobster. Once again, this was categorically refused by DFO, and we had zero profitability. In winter 2024, my quota is now set at 17%. 17% of 50,000 pounds is not profitable, but I have no choice. I have to voluntarily put myself in a bigger financial mess if I want to receive assistance from MAPAC. The year ended in deficit. MAPAC is helping me and my creditors. They, too, have heard the rumors about lobster licenses being issued and hope that our struggling crab fleet in Zone 12A will be supported, as there are now 5 fishermen in this zone experiencing the same reality. In December 2024, rumors are confirmed. Hopes are high. The criteria and information are beginning to be made public. Based on criteria that are subject to interpretation and debatable, as decided by the DFO, I'm disqualified from mackerel licenses due to my crab license and my place of residence. I'm also disqualified from the Anticosti zone because my fishing zone is not recognized as related on an administrative basis, even though it is geographically related. Finally, my fleet is concerned, only 43% of us will receive a license, while almost 100% of other fleets will receive a license. We are disillusioned. Allocation day arrives. DFO Quebec refuses to recognize my 2023 fishing year on the pretext that I operated my boat as captain, but under an Indigenous flag, and I am therefore disqualified for the 4th time from direct allocation. So I move on to the random draw. The draw is over. I call my account manager. It's not looking good. The 2025 lobster license issuance helped people in need, but it also made millionaires even richer and prompted retirees to return fishing. Young people are struggling to survive, accumulating debt, have nothing left to fish, and may go bankrupt and remain on the docks. Above all, they've lost confidence in fisheries and oceans management. Next, we will have Mr. Lantaigne for 5 minutes or less. You have the floor. Your microphone, please. I'm sorry. So I'm Jean Lamontagne, and of the Fédération Régionale Acadienne des Pêcheurs Professionnels in Shippagan, New Brunswick. And I've been in this business for a long time. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the allocation of redfish quotas announced by Minister Le Boutier on 26th of January 2024. The official announcement of the reopening of the redfish fishery in the Gulf of St. Lawrence stated, Phase 1, transitional, 2 years, data collection, preparation of fishers, market development, and strengthening of processing capacity. In Phase 2, long-term, establish a fishery with a modernized allocation key. According to scientific data, this phase would be a phase of expansion. It should be noted that at the same time, Minister Le Boutier announced a reduction of nearly 80% in shrimp quotas in the same areas. Shrimp fishermen in New Brunswick, Quebec, and Newfoundland and Labrador would receive only 10% of the allocated redfish quotas. For our fishermen, this was a huge blow, especially after the contradictory announcements in the past. And you can see the data from the Minister of Fisheries, Dominique Leblanc, in 2018, who was giving the priority to shrimpers. For New Brunswick, this represented 1,050 metric tons. In addition, it is possible to access an additional share via 65 to 100-foot semi-offshore vessels shared between New Brunswick and Quebec fishers, which may represent approximately 2 trips to sea. With these quantities, it is impossible for a fisher to equip himself with trawlers and modify his boat to engage in this fishery. Since 2016, during DFO consultations, we have expressed our concerns about the impact of redfish on shrimp stocks. Our comments have been ignored. We requested 2 measures. Priority access for shrimp boats in the 3 provinces, as they are the first to be impacted. And secondly, sufficient allocations to ensure the survival of these fleets, as shrimp is often their only resource. Last year, combined with costly fishing conditions and insufficient quotas, only 3,000 metric tons out of 60,000 metric tons available were caught. This year, thanks to a project from the Atlantic Fisheries Fund, we are testing 6 different trawlers with 9 shrimp boats for a total of 36 trips to sea. Combined with other regions, we estimate that 10,000 to 15,000 tons will be harvested out of the 60,000 tons allocated. The conclusion is clear. The allocation system is not working. The issue is not availability, but allocation. Who gets what? Our members, as well as those in Quebec and Newfoundland, do not have enough allocations to develop a business plan. It is impossible to invest in just a few fishing trips. Processing plants cannot plan production lines because the total allocations in their region are not sufficient to justify investments. After 2 years, and as the Minister indicated, the plan must be reviewed and amended. Today, we are proposing a few solutions. 1, redistribute allocations, taking into account profitability and sustainability of the shrimp fishers. Ensure sufficient distribution to each fisher to enable them to develop a business plan. 3, renew the Atlantic Fisheries Fund with a component for vessel and equipment modifications and for processing plants involved. Marketing, specific supports to develop new markets and increase the value of redfish. And finally, Atlantic Forum, bring all parties together to avoid duplication and identify best practices. Thank you for having listened to me. Thank you very much, Mr. Latang.
To our final opening remarks here from Mr. Bunnell. The floor is yours for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. I'm here today representing Ocean Choice International. Ocean Choice is a family-owned Newfoundland and Labrador seafood company founded 25 years ago by brothers Martin and Blaine Sullivan. Today, we're a vertically integrated global leader operating 5 processing plants in rural communities, a fleet of offshore factory freezer vessels managing our own quota access for key species, and partnering with approximately 2,000 independent fish harvesters. Headquartered in St. John's with sales offices around the world, we deliver premium Canadian seafood to over 30 countries. Our operations support 1,400 employees across 300 communities through the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, reflecting our deep commitment to people and communities. Sustainability is at the core of our business. Over 93% of the seafood that we harvest by value is certified sustainable by the Marine Stewardship Council or managed through a robust fishery improvement project. Ocean Choice's success and the strength of Canada's fishing industry as a whole depends on responsible science-based management and stable access to the resource. This stability allows companies like ours to make long-term investments, create year-round jobs, and build sustainable futures in coastal communities. That brings me to why we are here today, to discuss the allocation of Unit 1 redfish and the importance of management grounded in historical and stable access to the resource. Before discussing allocations, it is important to note that the Unit 1 redfish fishery dates back to the 1950s when it was developed by the offshore sector, which historically held about 78.7% of the quota. Even after the commercial fishery was closed in the early 1990s, a 2,000 metric ton index fishery continued under DFO-defined proportionate quota sharing aligned with historical allocations. Regarding the Minister's decision in February of 2024, while some have portrayed the offshore sector as winners, Ocean Choice and other offshore redfish participants actually lost 20% of their historical share. There are some unfortunate economic and biological realities when it comes to Unit 1 redfish that must be recognized. The size of the redfish in Unit 1 has actually stalled at around 24 to 25 centimeters since 2021, and scientists do not expect further growth. By comparison, most global redfish exceeds 40 centimeters in length, putting Canadian producers at a market disadvantage. The overall biomass has also declined sharply from a peak of over 4 million metric tons in 2019 to about 1.7 metric tons in 2024. Without new recruitment, the science suggests the biomass could fall to about roughly 10% of the original level within the next 8 years, even with limited fishing activity. These factors, combined with overly precautionary management measures, have led to very limited activity in this fishery over the past 2 years. Despite these challenges, Ocean Choice and our partners in the offshore sector have invested millions of dollars to develop and expand markets for smaller-sized fish. These investments include innovations in harvesting and processing, market diversification, and long-term strategies to position Canadian redfish competitively on the world stage. Stable access to fisheries like Unit 1 redfish through secure quota shares is essential for building a strong and sustainable industry. It enables companies to invest in market diversification, equipment, infrastructure, and workforce development. Stability supports resilient coastal communities, aligns harvesting capacity with available resources, and improves the quality and the value of seafood products. Economically, it fosters self-reliant enterprises, supports skilled year-round employment, and creates meaningful career opportunities for young people in the industry. Long-standing quota sharing arrangements are the foundation of responsible and transparent fisheries management in Canada and reflected in current fisheries policy. For example, when closed fisheries are reopened, the Minister generally respects historic fleet shares, recognizing past participation and dependency as the basis for allocations. Ocean Choice has invested heavily in the fishery, paying fair market value for every pound of quota, including Unit 1 redfish. Beyond securing access, we've built global markets for Canadian seafood and invested in advanced technology, including our green-class vessel, the MV Calvert. Our significant investment in the Calvert was made possible because of stable access to species such as Unit 1 redfish and other ground fish stocks. These kinds of long-term multi-million-dollar investments are not possible without confidence in secure quota access. In summary, these examples from long-term investments in market diversification to the Calvert illustrate how stability of access underpins not only the sustainability of the resource, but also meaningful employment, economic growth, and the long-term viability of Canada's fishing sector. Looking ahead, future allocation decisions, including for Unit 1 redfish, must respect historical access so participants can continue to invest and contribute to strong, sustainable fisheries. Thank you for the opportunity to make a statement. I welcome the committee's questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bonnell. So with that, we're going to go into the 6-minute round of questioning, starting with Mr. Small from the Conservative Party. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a question here that I'm going to put to all witnesses. Mr. Bonnell, I'll start with you. Can you shed some light on the influence of foreign Liberal-funded ENGOs on fisheries management after 10 years of this Liberal government and 7 ministers of fisheries? Has there been an impact on the Unit 1 redfish quota because of the stakeholder status of some of these ENGOs, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've been in the private sector now for about 8 years, been engaging with ENGOs. I've attempted many times over to build a relationship with the ENGO community, maybe having an idealistic or naive view that we could build a positive relationship with the ENGO community. It's been tremendously challenging. Certainly, groups like Oceana Canada has taken a strong position on Unit 1 redfish in the reopening and suggested quotas that are much smaller than those that were set. I find them challenging at times around the advisory table for sure. They're taking positions that are I guess, much more extreme than I would have seen ENGOs take in the past. It's been challenging to deal with. I've always said to them, and maybe my last comment on this, with the ENGO community, you have the option of the carrot versus the stick, and there's much more progress that can be made in engaging with industry and working more collaboratively to find some common ground. But much of their positioning has been really towards closed fisheries, MPAs, restricted fishing access, different things that are far more preservationist probably than sustainable fishing or conservation measures. So that's some general concerns I would say that I would have related to the ENGO community.
Thank you, Mr. Bonnell. Madame Gagne, I heard you mention the closure of herring and mackerel fisheries in your region. Do you think that in part is due to the growing influence of foreign-funded ENGOs like Oceana and Oceans North?
Can you just repeat? Sorry.
Oh. I heard you mention in your opening remarks about the devastation that you've endured because of the closure of the mackerel and herring fisheries in your region. Do you think that the ENGOs like Oceana and Oceans North contributed to the demise of the mackerel fishery?
Il a été démontré dans des études qui...
It was shown in studies that have been published, particularly in the United States, that mackerel is a fish that migrates great distances and can move a great distance in a short period of time. So certainly those big vessels have perhaps harmed the situation, but we are subject on the East Coast to a double standard. We go out to fish with our maximum quotas, but we're considered as having the same quotas as seiners. So yes, to what degree are there repercussions on small fishermen? I couldn't really say to what point they particularly hurt us as inshore fishermen.
Monsieur Latin, can you shed some light on the growing impact of foreign-funded ENGOs on our stock advisories?
I will answer to this, Mr. Small, that when the redfish did appear in 2011, the answer from DFO was to close zone to the shrimp fishery. So we ended up having to protect the redfish, and at the same time, those redfish was eating shrimp like crazy, to the point where we lost 80% of the stock. Now, when you ask how Oceano and those NGOs played a game there, they were putting pressure, enormous pressure on BFO to make sure that we would protect the resurgence of that redfish fishery. Now, we lost the shrimp fishery in the Gulf, and we don't have actually a redfish fishery. So what did we accomplish with those pressure of the NGOs? To ask the questions, basically, is kind of providing a sad answer, because what it end up doing is ruining one fishery and not having a profitable one. If they would have listened to what the fishery industry was telling to tell DFO to keep on this shrimp fishery, and at the same time reopen as soon as possible this redfish fishery to diminish its impact that it finally did have on the shrimp fishery before it end up in the mess that it is actually is. So I would answer to you that yes, the strong impact that Oceano and company had on DFO at those dates, really, we are paying the bill today for that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Small. Next, we'll move to Monsieur Cormier pour 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Latang from Shiphagan. Thank you for being here with us. Look, I just heard what you said about one thing, which is that there were perhaps too high expectations to reopen the redfish fishery. We agree it took too long. It had an impact on the shrimp stocks. And you and I, Mr. Langtang, and probably everyone here knows that that's not the only impact that the redfish had. There was a big impact on the resource. But one thing we perhaps agree less on, and we've had the opportunity to discuss this, was on about the 10% that you received. I think you knew that our position was at least we started somewhere. There's 10% that you didn't have before. But I think the fact remains that you and I know that it's indeed not enough for your fleet to become profitable once again. So having said that, Mr. Latang, you talked about the new project that you have with the Fisheries Fund, and we've been able to launch a few new initiatives to come and help your industry. In terms of the 10%, I asked the question of officials a few meetings ago at the committee here, and the answer was that yes, indeed, 10% was mathematically impossible for shrimpers to break even. But why, if they already knew that, over the last 2 years, did we not look at the allocations? Why did we not review them and boost them? Because I think that you and I know that the minister has all of the authority on the sharing of that resource. So I'll let you perhaps comment on your new project. How's it going so far in terms of this new initiative to get out to sea and fish the redfish? I'll let you answer. Well, what I said in my comments finally was that currently we don't have a problem of quota allocation, because the allocations, if we look at what was harvested in 2024, we only fished about 5% of the authorized quotas. So that was 10,000 tons of the 60. So it's the same thing this year. There are allocations that we might fish 15% of what those allocations are this year, maybe 20% if we get that far. The problem in terms of the allocations is that the fisher, the shrimper, currently has that 10%. He can't go to a financial institution and say, here's my business plan. I can't go out and fund modifications to my boat to fish redfish, to go out once, because that's what that does. Maybe 2 trips to sea. So the way in which this allocation was done does not allow these businesses in Quebec, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland to put together a business plan to be able to do anything with it. So that's on the fisherman's side, but we have the same situation on the processing side, because the processor, if he wants to present a business plan to his financial institution to process redfish, he can't do it. So we heard these comments earlier. I don't want to repeat them, but some have had too many, and people who haven't had enough. And we need to be between the two. I'm sorry, I have 2 minutes left. So to come back to that point, the total allocation of 60,000 tons, you said only about 10 metric tons were harvested. Is that what you said? Well, that's my estimation, seeing what I've seen. All right, so if there was a percentage of those allocations that aren't being fished right now that could be directed to fleets like yours or others in difficulty, would you have a market to sell that redfish? Would that help your fishermen financially? Because the resource that's not being harvested right now, I understand there are companies here today, and we'll have questions for them, others who came to testify in the past, who they have access to that quota, but they don't fish it for various reasons. So would you be able, first of all, to fish it, process it, and then make it profitable? That's an excellent question you were asking, because the profitability isn't there. Today, the project that we've been referring to with the Fisheries Fund, it's 20 cents a pound is the price paid for the fish. So typically, we get 100,000 pounds, and so that's $20,000 in fish. It costs $50,000 to $60,000 to go out to sea once. So even with the money from the Fisheries Fund, it's completely impossible for a fisher to go out and fish and make an income from that. That's why these current allocations are not fished. It's not worth it. We're not able currently to be able to have a profitable fishery with a price that is so low. So I'm answering quickly to give you more time, but currently it is impossible to make these trips to sea profitable. There really have to be efforts made in the marketing area to boost the price of the fish, and then perhaps in the midterm we might be able to make that fishery profitable. Thank you. Thank you. And now we're going to Mr. Deschênes for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question's for Ms. Gagné. In your presentation, You finish up by saying that these exploratory licenses have made millionaires even richer. So what are you talking about? What do you mean? Well, Mr. Chairman, what I was trying to say in my speech was that DFO has always wanted to manage the resource. When they started issuing permits or licenses, they went further. And we were separated into fleets, which is to say one of the criterion was to be a fleet in difficulty, fine. Except that during the allocation, they re-separated that and said, okay, we have X number of licenses for this fleet and X for another one. So it was not balanced. They never looked, and it's a fact that DFO had. They are the ones who deal with these permits, so they can see what the transactions were over the last few years. They can see if that fisher bought this permit 2 years ago or 15 years ago, and it's the same thing for the vessels. They're all registered. So without necessarily knowing it or applying this, they had data that would have allowed them to do sorting out and seeing who is really in difficulty and who wasn't. So it's sometimes the fisherman is not. How often can this happen? Well, it can happen in several ways. There can be an inheritance. Let's say the parent transfers their business to a child and they oversee it. But it can also happen that, I'll give you an example, a fleet in trouble, the fisher has been in that business for 20 years and has debts. But sometimes the vessel's paid for, the permit is paid for, and ship licenses have great value. So now you've just added a lobster license to that. And so those might become permanent allocations in time. So now you're dealing with people who have no debt becoming even richer. That's what I was talking about with millionaires getting richer. So now we're talking about fishers going into debt when it's an issue of revenue, because indeed one of the criteria in terms of DFO is to help fleets that are in difficulty. So to your knowledge, did DFO check on fishermen's income? Because they might have different licenses and be part of a fleet that's in difficulty, but have a different one with a successful fleet. Mr. Chairman, to my knowledge, that has not been done. There hasn't been that verification because there are inconsistencies that could have been avoided. And so without giving me names, can you give me examples of inconsistencies that you're aware of? Well, simply people who are retired, who still own licenses, who come back out to the fishery, people who've been fishing for decades, who have no debts at all, who got licenses. I would say those are the two biggest groups that exist, but there are also, in the injustices related to the financial aspects of this, there's no concept in the criterion where they checked, where they really did research on who's just acquired a fishing business and who has owned one for a long time, who's greatly at risk of going bankrupt or not being able to make ends meet or make the business a success. And they don't have that security already. There was no question of that. So if I understand you well, there are criteria about fleets in difficulty, but it would have been more appropriate perhaps to speak of fishers in difficulty and to do an analysis of the financial statements of the individuals. I wouldn't push that far, but we've been told time and again that DFO is only there to manage the resource. So once they established the concept of fleets in difficulty, it should have stopped there. For the rest of it, who's in trouble, who is not, that's information that DFO had, that they didn't use, And they didn't put up a red flag, if I can put it that way, to say that they didn't try and help people who were in difficulty in a fair manner. They didn't do that work. So what you're saying is that they should have taken the level of indebtedness of fishers into account in making these decisions. Well, the figures are not necessarily disclosed, but there is a traceable line of information that could have been used in terms of the allocations of these permits and licenses. Well, even if there was no more shrimp fishery, would you say this is true? A paid license, and for the person who has no debt, even if you don't go out to fish, you have no expenses, no income, and that's about it. Whereas if you just bought a license and you don't go out to fish, you have payments to make and your debt just continues to rise because you have to defer your payments. I don't know if it's clear that way. That was your case, you're saying? Well, yes, that's right. I had just bought in. I was highly indebted. And then 3 fisheries out of 3 closed. No consideration for the date in which I bought in and the level of debt that results from that, and no solutions either. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
Questioning going into the 5-minute round. We're going to have time for the Conservatives, Liberals, and then 2.5 minutes for Monsieur Deschênes, and then we'll wrap up this panel. But with that, I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll turn first question over to Monsieur Latine. These licenses were in the province and in the area of the minister's home, basically, very close to her riding in her area. Should the minister have had a full awareness of the implications of the decisions on who got the licenses and quotas been part of what she should have known, and do you feel that she had that information?
Are you talking about the lobster license or about the redfish licenses?
Well, the lobster licenses were probably closer to her home, but even the redfish licenses, they're in, basically the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
Yes. Well, I won't speak. I won't speak about the lobster license because I'm based in New Brunswick, and what you're referring to is her location in the Rivière-au-Nord and in the Gaspésie area. But I definitively can relate to the redfish license, which is basically we do recognize that the fact, and DFO does recognize that as well. The redfish fishery is a trawling fishery, and who's trawling the Gulf? The only remaining fleet that does that actually is the shrimper fleet, and Mrs. Le Boutillier had around 32 to 30, if I'm right, 32 or 36 shrimper based right in her riding. Now, in 2018, I'll go back to 2018, where Dominique Leblanc, when he knew the actual situation of the shrimper fleet at that time, he said publicly to the press that the shrimpers fleet in the Gulf would be the group that would be prioritized at the moment that the access would be open for the redfish fishery. Now, what happened in 2024, 6 years after that Mrs. Le Boutillier switched her mind, or the DFO switched that mind, and totally, went away and redistributed those shrimp the redfish allocation to all kinds of people is totally different from what has been said before.
Promise made, promise broken from the sound of it.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn next question to Mr. Bonnell. Mr. Bonnell, you mentioned that the redfish aren't growing to size in the area. Has there been any science to indicate why this is? And is this a local or regional phenomenon, or is this happening in other areas of the world, or the North Atlantic?
Redfish, I mean, the latest science assessment that we have that was presented to us this year basically indicated that the redfish there have been stalled for the last 5 years at 23 to 24 centimeters, which is your market challenge. Your challenge is not resource limitations. And in fact, only about 3,200 tons of the 60,000-ton quota was caught last year. And the whole suggestion by Jean that somehow this is an inshore issue, a lack of access.
No,
a fraction of that fishery, only a fraction of that quota was taken last year.
Why aren't the fish growing? That's the key.
The fish aren't growing for a couple of reasons. Environmental, from what we understand from science, what we understand from science, fish aren't growing. Environmental factors are driving that, warming water temperatures, and lack of food, basically, because the area is dominated by redfish. We had 4.2 million metric tons at its peak. So food availability has been an issue there. That's been the primary challenge why the fish hasn't grown and is not expected to grow any larger, which is your major market implication and challenge with respect to redfish.
Were there larger fish present 5 years ago before the population grew to
the biomass 5 years ago was about 4.2 million metric tons. But what you need to understand is this stock is driven by 3-year classes. I think it's 2011, 2012, and 2013. Everybody was excited about this resource and this stock at the time because we expected the fish to grow at about 1.5 centimeters to 2 centimeters a year, I think, at the time. It happened in the early years, but then it stalled. And so there was great expectation for good reason on Unit 1 redfish. But we now have a fishery that size is stalled and will not grow. And we have a fishery whose biomass is declining with or without fishing. It'll go back to about 10% of its original biomass in the next eight years. That's the reality of Unit 1 redfish that people maybe are not following, don't want to talk about, but that is the reality, unfortunately, of this resource and this stock. It's not a resource allocation issue. I respect Jean so much, but he's just way off base with that observation.
It's a food source issue for the redfish. There's not enough food for them to grow.
That is one of the considerations that science, one of the major factors that science is highlighted, along with other environmental conditions like warming water temperatures that are driving that circumstance as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Connors for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and welcome, Mr. Bonnell. I'm going to a few questions for you. Glad to see you here, representing Newfoundland, Labrador, and OCI, which is very important to our fishery in Newfoundland, and the fishery is very important to the economy of Newfoundland. So I want to welcome you here. I want to just go back. You're the people that are on the water. What does your data show about the redfish? And for that, is that comparable to exactly what the science is saying?
Indication from fishing activity, certainly what's been seen and what's come out of Unit 1 and Unit 2. We're a very active participant in Unit 2 redfish fishery as well. We caught about 3 million pounds from that fishery last year. In fact, there's actually what we believe to be an actual movement of some of the Unit 1 redfish into Unit 2, and the size of Unit 2 has actually gotten a lot smaller over the past couple of years. So you've got a region in the Gulf and off the south coast of Newfoundland of redfish that are very small in size comparatively to redfish in other jurisdictions like Iceland and Norway, where I mentioned in my opening comments, the average size is about 40 centimeters. People ask about the market for redfish. There is a market for redfish globally, a very significant market for good-sized redfish. The challenge we face, and it's a huge challenge, is how to deal with the smaller sizes that we're encountering here. It's a reality whether you're in the inshore or the offshore, or whether you're indigenous or otherwise. These are some just natural, challenging realities that we have to deal with respect to the redfish in that region.
So size is the challenge, and that would be the processing of those would be the challenge?
Size is a major challenge. I mean, when we fillet redfish in our processing operation in Fortune off the south coast on the Burin Peninsula, we start filleting at about 270 grams. That's usually the size that we start filleting, and that's a small fillet, like that's a 2 to 4 ounce fillet probably. Most of the fish in Unit 1's under, a large portion is under 200 grams. And redfish are very bony fish, so it's really, really difficult to produce a fillet from that product when it's so small. That's an inherent challenge. There are markets for whole round redfish. There are markets for headed and gutted redfish. We're exploring those. We're doing everything we can with our sales and marketing capacity. Other companies in the Atlantic region are doing the same, but there are some very inherent challenges around that.
So you fish shrimp as well. Relationship between redfish and the shrimp is what's happening with the shrimp as a result of the redfish, or what's happening because of the vice versa?
It's not an easy question to answer, to be very honest. I mean, there's no doubt a predator-prey relationship between redfish and shrimp. You see it in the Gulf, you see it off the south coast. We fish redfish off the northeast coast as well. You see it You see it there as well, where there are interactions. The scale of it, we just really don't know. We don't have the data. I don't think DFO has the data to really quantitatively identify the impact that the biomass of redfish has had on shrimp. That being said, in 2019, 2020, or 21, I guess, when we had 4.2 million metric tons, it was the predominant biomass in the Gulf region. It had an impact on everything, no doubt, including shrimp, the scale of which we just don't know.
Are there any other challenges that I'm missing or that you're having in the industry with the redfish that you'd like to bring up here? There's anything else that we haven't mentioned or you'd like to elaborate on?
No, I think the challenge overall on redfish really right now, the reason why, we only harvested as a complete industry 3,200 tons of a 60,000 ton quota last year, and we're sitting at about 27 or 2,800 tons so far this year. It's the reality of the size of the fish that we're dealing with. It's not an allocation issue. I can't stress that enough. It's not a resource allocation issue. I resent the notion that somehow the expropriation of quota from one sector to the other sector is going to solve this problem. It's a market challenge, and this, unfortunately, in the Gulf, it doesn't look like this fish is going to grow to a size that's going to be globally competitive. So you have to make do with what you have. Our energy and all of our resources are going into and other companies. You had Alain d'Entremont here a couple of weeks ago talking about their efforts. We're exploring markets for whole round redfish in China. We are working on the bait market to try to expand it for redfish in Atlantic Canada. We've done some really good work as a sector on that. Significant portion of the lobster sector now is using redfish. We're hoping that's going to expand. So bait is an important area. Looking at food grade opportunities in Asia and in Europe, although it's more challenging in Europe, which is a high-end market for larger redfish. So we're exploring, we've looked at North African markets. We're exploring a whole host of options and scenarios for fillet production, for whole round production, for headed and gutted production, because the solution is going to be a cumulative of the inshore, the offshore, harvesters, processors, working together to try to get more value from this resource, to get more of it out of the water, certainly as well, and to try to generate some additional value for the region.
Very much, Mr. Connors. Et prochainement, on va terminer avec Monsieur.
And now we'll end with Mr. Deschênes for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gagné, you explained in your presentation what happened to you, but you started out being a pelagic fisher, and then you had a crab license. Then that quota went down each year, and then there was the moratorium on the herring and mackerel fisheries. So you explained it briefly, but you said in the end that you were disqualified. So how is it that you weren't able to get one of the exploratory licenses? Well, there were several disqualifications that I faced. For the pelagic fish, I didn't have access, first of all, because the reference years that they decided to base it on were really years before 2020, so they were focused on older years. And there was the residency requirement as well that disqualified us. For turbot, I don't have any. Shrimp, I don't have any. So I could have been in 12A as a crabber, yes. In Zone 17, which is Anticosti, I was disqualified because I didn't have a related permit and they were reserved for part of the North Shore in New Brunswick and part of the Gaspé. So you're fishing in 12A, which is connected to Anticosti. Well, not administratively, but physically, yes. And I'm also connected in Zone 16, which is my mackerel zone. I'm authorized to go and fish in Anticosti if I wish, but that wasn't taken into consideration. So I didn't have any access to the new Zone 17. And the last time that I was disqualified was because, despite the reference, and when they published the criteria, they always referred to the fisher and not the history of the licenses. So in my case, in 2023, I, the fisher, was on board of my vessel in my zone, but I was flying an indigenous flag. And so the landings I had were under the indigenous quota. So when you make that kind of change, it's a longer process. So we started on the Indigenous quota and afterwards transferred to mine. So we didn't make it that far, and I was disqualified for 2023 because yes, I was considered as someone who had not fished, and therefore I wouldn't be marking up the 15 points required. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
First panel, and I would like to thank our witnesses for taking the time to meet with us. Your testimony will be very, very helpful for the report that we're working on, including the recommendations that will flow from that as well. So thank you very much, and with that, we're going to briefly suspend while we welcome our next panel. We're moving into the second panel for today. I just want to make a few comments on behalf of our new witnesses that are appearing here today in person and also on video conference. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. En ce qui concerne l'interprétation,
As for interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen between Floor English and French, and for those who are in the room, you can use the earpiece and choose the channel of your choice.
Chair. So I would like to welcome our witnesses for the second panel. We have Guy Gallant, fish harvester. We have Claudio Bernachez, Directeur Général Coopérative des Capitaines Propriétaires.
Director General of the Coopérative des Capitaines Propriétaires de la Gaspésie, and Jean-René Boucher, General Manager, Regroupement des pêcheurs professionnels du Nord de la Gaspésie.
Opening statements for 5 minutes or less, starting with Mr. Gallant.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Guy Gallant. I'm a fish harvester within the 4R Gulf region. I'm from Benwiles Cove. It's a town situated in the Bay of Islands on Newfoundland's west coast, immediately adjacent to the 4R zone. I'd like to begin by thanking those involved for the privilege to be included in these hearings today. I will be speaking today not only on my behalf, but on behalf of my father, Guy Gallant Sr., and a few other harvesters that were prevented from participating and thus absent from any discussions held prior to the opening of the redfish in 4R. My father in particular has been fishing in the Gulf of St. Lawrence since 1968 and operating his own enterprise since 1974. And one of the very last to be red fishing. He is still active fisher today. And for many years, he made his sole living, along with myself, my brother, and the rest of our crew, solely from redfish in the Gulf, St. Lawrence, and the Unit 2, until succumbing to the reality of the poor stock management in the late 2000s. The direct omission of his experiences and his knowledge was nothing short of discrimination and the political ambition perpetrated by the FFAW and the others involved in the preliminary stages of reopening this stock, obtaining information only from what would be the island's West Coast shrimp fleet, which in my view has no direct correlation to any assignment of a redfish tack. The end of result of which leaves us with a quota that's impossible to sustain an enterprise today. I'll deviate from my notes a little here. Our plight to this situation we're in here now started back in the early to mid-90s when we tried to obtain access to shrimp in the Gulf. We were denied by the department, and we sort of been left with only redfish since the collapse of the cod fishery. We started lobbying government for the access to the northern shrimp back in the mid-90s when the boom in the shrimp started down off the northeast coast of the province. A committee was formed on the island here. They called it the North of 50/30, rejecting any applicant from obtaining any direct access to the shrimp who lived below the 50/30 latitude line, and thus left us with absolutely nothing left to catch on the otter trawl side of our enterprise, but redfish. And we're hearing discussions here about the shrimp fleet. There was also a redfish fleet here. We were one of probably 5 that actually sustained ourselves solely through redfish until the mid-2000s, when it was just impossible to make a further contribution to your enterprise from redfish. We then, through much expense, sort of redone our boat to be able to make available of our seining license, our purse seine license. So we were able to sustain ourselves for a few years after that at the mackerel fishery. And of course, we know that is under moratorium for the last few years. So again, back to, we had to rebuild our vessel, the Gallant Lady, to put her back at the otter trawl sector of the fishery. And it took quite a sum of money, well over $1 million, all in participation in this redfish quota that was to be allocated. And unfortunately, through the misappropriation, I feel, of the allocation, we were left with mere scraps to try to make an enterprise viable. 74 ton. We'd have to decide which part of the fish hold we'd put that in aboard of our vessel to keep her in good trim, because it wouldn't be enough to load her one trip. This is what we'd have to sustain ourselves with.
Mr. Gallant,
it's impossible.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up because we're just past 5 minutes here.
Sure, yes, thank you very much. And well, just to conclude, I would like again to thank for the opportunity to even be speaking here today, because we went so many years going unheard. So again, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gallant. Prochainement, on va Monsieur.
Now we'll have Mr. Bernatchez for 5 minutes or less. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the St. Lawrence River and the people who depend on it have been experiencing significant upheaval in recent years. To give you an idea, the following species have been severely impacted since 2020. In 2020, moratorium on snow crab in Zone 12B. In 2021, moratorium on mackerel and spring herring. In 2022, moratorium on winter flounder, yellowtail, flounder, and northern cod. And 2023, collapse of Greenland halibut and northern shrimp stocks. This means that several fleets in all of Quebec, regions of Quebec, have been heavily impacted during this period. In 2023-24, there were difficult years for coastal communities in northern Gaspé that rely on fishing. Activity levels on the docks reached a low rarely seen before. In the MRC Côte de Gaspé, several measures were put in place to provide minimal support to struggling fishermen. Fortunately, 2025 saw a slight upturn in activity, benefiting some fishing harvesters and businesses related to the industry. Although the challenge remains for some fleets, the economy is generally doing better than in the previous 2 years. With regard to the subject of this study, namely the method of allocating new quotas or new licenses, whether to fishermen or fishermen's associations, it would be desirable for the industry and DFO to agree on the broad principles guiding the processes to be followed. We could talk about fairness, assistance to fleets in difficulty, maximum benefits for coastal communities, and so on. In addition, if we could find a way to make sure these assistance measures are not cast in stone, it could provide the flexibility needed to respond to changing conditions in the ecosystem and the industry that depends on it. I hope that the study conducted by this committee, which is primarily aimed at evaluating the method of allocating exploratory lobster permits in zones 17, 18, and 19, will result in a shared commitment by all stakeholders to ensure the sustainability of the harvesting industry in the face of the challenges that lie ahead. I ask you, members of the committee, to work together as catalysts catalyzers to courageously initiate discussions that may be difficult at times but are necessary in this regard. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Bernatchez. And next, we will have Mr. Boucher for 5 minutes or less. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this study aims to shed light on the process of allocating exploratory lobster fishing licenses in order to improve things for the future. Although certain aspects need to be reviewed, we believe it is important to provide some context and highlight what has been done well in the process, specifically for Zone 19. Turbot fishermen have witnessed the collapse of their stock in recent years. The TAC, which had remained stable at 4,500 tons for several years, is now set at 290 tons for the 2025-26 season for Zones 4 RST in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The value of turbot landings in the Gaspésie fell from nearly $10 million in 2017-18 to $3,700,000 in 2021-22, before collapsing completely to $18,721 in 2024-25. Faced with the collapse of the turbot fishery, these exploratory lobster fishing licenses are a timely lifeline for this fleet. The increase in lobster abundance has been observed by an experimental project in our region. We can see that with these new permits, there will be a change in 2025. They have shown a more interesting level of the stock. To determine the eligibility of fishers for these licenses, DFO used various criteria, including residency, as well as the fishing efforts made in previous years by fishers in so-called struggling fleets. The residency requirement is one of the oldest criteria used by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to determine fishermen's eligibility for fishing licenses, both when new licenses are issued and in the case of license reassignments. For example, fishermen have brought to my attention that when lobster licenses were issued in southern Gaspé in the 1990s, fishermen from northern Gaspé were not eligible because they did not reside in that area. As for the criterion related to fishing effort, it is not perfect. It might have been appropriate to establish a minimum landing threshold for eligibility to ensure that active fishers were not just active in appearance. Furthermore, although the Minister mentioned wanting to help the next generation with these licenses, DFO could have made an additional effort in this regard without excluding experienced fishers from the process. Although the process moved quickly, it must be acknowledged that departmental managers and the Minister's office were receptive to our comments and suggestions. For example, the idea of issuing 100 trap licenses rather than 250 trap licenses to non-Aboriginal fishers in Zone 19 came from the industry. This is ultimately what was done, but even though initially several people at the department did not view this proposal favorably, the deployment of these licenses in 3 phases rather than 2 as initially planned was a suggestion made by other industry stakeholders, which the department listened to. It would be wrong to claim that unrecognized associations were completely ignored, since suggestions were made by individual fishermen were taken into account by the DFO in the implementation of this project. With the challenges facing the fishing industry continuing to mount, it is important that these licenses continue to help fishermen and fleets in difficulty or even the next generation. It is therefore important to consider the transferability of these licenses, whether they are exploratory or commercial. In conclusion, I would like to raise the following question. Should the fact that some groups or individuals were unable to obtain exploratory lobster fishing licenses completely discredit the process as well as the criteria used to grant these fishing licenses? Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Boucher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boucher.
Right into our first round of questioning, the 6-minute round, starting with Mr. Small.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is to Mr. Gallant. Mr. Gallant, how do you compare the reality of Unit 1 redfish fishery with the hype that was created by then Minister LeBlanc in 2018?
It's very difficult to put the two of it together because a lot of what we've been preparing for the last 6 or 7 years in revamping our vessel to go back at the red fishing, the hype that was associated with it was to the point of where you had to stop everything else and get ready for this. And to end up at the end of the day with 74 ton, 140,000 pound of redfish valued at 25, 27 cents a pound, you're looking at $38,000, $40,000 worth of fish to catch. That's what you got to sustain yourself with for the year, and then hope that something comes down the pipe to where you can add a few more pounds to that. It's just to say unviable is an understatement.
Now, we had First Nations allocations. I believe you are a member of a First Nations band yourself. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Mr. Small.
What's your opinion on how that allocation was distributed? Not the size of the allocation, but who's actually going to be catching it. Would you think you yourself would be a major benefactor of that, being in the Halapu First Nation?
I would hope so, Mr. Small. You know, I would think that's the government's projection to have it allocated to members of the First Nations was distributed to the First Nations so that their own members can make avail of it. However, I mean, with what we have on our own enterprise to start fishing with the you know, such a minuscule amount of quota to start a business plan for this upcoming year, and just going out on a wing to say that, okay, we'll do better when we get the allocation that the First Nations been allotted. You can't run an enterprise hoping that somebody else is going to take you into consideration because you're a member without it being legally stated.
So Mr. Gallant, basically you invested $1 million on the strength of the future of the redfish fishery from, you know, going forward from 2018. Is that correct?
We spent well over $1 million, Mr. Small.
So I've got a question for you as well here. We all know well, in my opinion, obviously is well known on the impact of ENGOs on fisheries management. And you mentioned the demise of the mackerel fishery, and we've been fighting so hard to get that back. What's your opinion of the increasing influence of ENGOs as stakeholders?
Mr. Small, all my life, I've been fishing now for 36 years. All we've based fisheries on were science, not influence, especially influence from parties who have nothing invested in this industry. That's all we've based all of our fisheries on, good or bad, was science. And now all of a sudden we have a large entity of ENGOs that's having way too much influence on what this country is doing.
Thank you. To Monsieur Bernatchez, what's your opinion of the increasing influence of ENGOs at stock advisories, and what do you think the impact was on the Unit 1 quota? Scientists said that that quota could have been set at a sustainable level of 300,000 metric tons for now. If it's going to die, you might as well catch it. It's going to die one way or the other. Do you think that the ENGOs had an impact on having that quota set at such a low level as 60,000 tons? And what was that impact to investment in your harvester, your fleet?
I hope they had no impact on any decision that's been made. You've got the industry and you've got DFO, the scientists who care about the resource. I mean, if a resource goes down enough that you have to declare a moratorium, as a scientist, I guess you won't feel good, you know. And as a fisherman, if your resource decline and you lose your way of life, your income, you cannot feel good. So do we really need a third entity to come and try to tell us, I mean by us, all the stakeholders, what to do? I don't know how and why they ended up being part of discussions.
Thank you.
Much, Mr. Small. Et prochainement, on va à Monsieur Cormier pour 6 minutes.
And now we'll go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes. Thank you. Mr. Bernatchez, we could say that the two subjects we're studying today, whether it's lobster licenses or redfish licenses, you're involved because I think you represent all of those harvesters and groups. So first of all, in terms of the decision that was taken by the minister at the time, in terms of not the sharing, but the allocation of those lobster permits, licenses rather, do you think that when the minister took that decision, the information that she had before her at the time, that she made a good decision for the exploratory licenses that were allocated? Well, there will always be people who disagree with decisions that have been made, and obviously those who are on the good side of the permits, that is to say those who received them, will agree with it, and those who didn't, with reason, will be unhappy. So could the process have been better? Perhaps. How, I couldn't say. Now, will that have a beneficial impact on our communities? And, give us some examples for your communities. And in terms of your members, is there a beneficial impact? Well, several of our members were given licenses, and it was very beneficial. Some were able to save their businesses. Others were able to stave off to trouble. So for many fish harvesters, it was beneficial. In terms of the landings, were they good? Well, the catch were at historic levels, I would say, over the last 3 years. We saw quantities increasing, and that was good for everyone, people who had harvested before and people who were new to it. Will it last? We don't know. But it's very good at the moment. Well, just to make sure we're talking about the same thing, we're talking about Zone 19 around the region of Anticosti. Well, since there are 3 zones, and so it's Zone 18 in 2024 was the best, and now it's Zone 17, which is on the island of Anticosti, around it. And so this is north of Gaspésie is Zone 19. So we hear a lot about herring and mackerel fish harvesters saying that they were unhappy with the decision that was taken, that they didn't receive any licenses. In the previous committee meetings, I alluded to the fact that the lobster fishermen, more in the area of Passé-Biac in that region, where the herring and mackerel fishermen are situated. I think the prices are good in that case in terms of lobster. But those fishermen also have allocations for snow crab, and they have had since 2020. So is it a solution for those herring and mackerel fishermen to have a percentage, perhaps, of those allocations? Is that perhaps a solution? Because it's going better in those regions than elsewhere? Well, that's a question that requires a delicate answer. I don't know what the differences are between those various zones in the Gaspésie, but if we can find ways to offer assistance measures to help those in difficulty and perhaps redistribute these licenses in the future to other fleets, so that others can also do better, well, we might have found a part of the solution, at least, to avoid certain crises. Okay, so for redfish at the moment, you heard certain comments in terms of sharing of allocations or quotas. You heard about this 10% figure. We can agree that that's a beginning. It's not enough to be profitable. Even the officials said so. What would be the magic number that you would need in terms of shrimpers, for example, to have a profitable trips out to sea? Because it costs less now to go out and fish redfish rather than to go out to fish shrimp. Is that correct? Yes, because I'm not going to say it'll stay like that, but in the last 2 years when fishers go out to sea for redfish, depending on the time of year and the constraints that they have, some people can come back within 24 or 48 hours and have practically a full load. So that's profitable if that's the case. But I know another harvester who had to go out to units 1 and 2 in the winter, and in a case like that, with the distance to be covered and the requirements, it becomes very difficult to make a trip profitable. Mr. Boucher, you said earlier that the decision regarding this sharing of new lobster licenses was okay. So why do you think that some people seem to feel it's unjust and that there's some kind of plot regarding the allocations? Do you think that the minister's decision was the right one? Well, I think that making a perfect decision under the circumstances was impossible, given all of the components that had to be taken into consideration, fleets in difficulty, etc. So I think the decision that was made was all right. But I think overall that there's adequate work was done. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cormier. And now we'll go to Mr. Deschênes for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for you, Mr. Boucher. There's a criteria that comes back, and that is the fleets in difficulty. Everyone seems to agree on that criterion. But how is it determined who is in difficulty, perhaps more so than others? So you said that for turbot fishermen, there's been a collapse of the stocks. That's something no one will argue with. So amongst your members, did some have licenses for maybe halibut, for example? Well, this turbot was at the heart of their businesses, and other licenses were attached to that. But that was the main fishery that collapsed, as I mentioned earlier. But you said that some turbot fishers had some exploratory lobster permits. What was the level of difficulty there? Well, if people who had groundfish permits had permits that have become individual ones, or they're individual ones that were added on to their initial ones. So were there people who were in difficulty because the turbot was collapsing, or they were going to try and find interesting amounts of halibut? They could do that, yes, but the profitability of the business really relied on all of the species that were landed, whether turbot, snow crab in some cases, etc. So if you remove the main business of a business, they might not make ends meet. So often you're profitable enough just to be able to make payments. But did some of your fishers go out and get up to 100,000 pans of halibut? No, we're not talking about that level. You talked about consultations that you participated in. And was the DFO interested in each of the fishermen individually? Well, that's not something we were trying to do. The financial aspect is not necessarily taken into account when doing these kinds of assessments. It's part of the suggestions that have been put forward. Some were not retained. In terms of the financial situation of each of the businesses, I think that we were in a good position to have an overall view of what was happening with the portfolios of the licenses that were allocated. Even if we didn't have individual statements, we had a good idea of their situation in general. So when the turbot stocks collapsed, some people still managed to make hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. Are you aware of that? No, I don't think so. You spoke also in your presentation, I think you were talking about pelagic fish harvesters, that they were consulted because there were individual representations that might have been made. So what were you saying there? Well, no, I wasn't referring to pelagic fishers in that passage. There are fish harvesters that were not necessarily included in the department's criteria, who are in the Rimouski area, who fish snow crab, for example, and with exchanges that they had with DFO, launched the idea of creating a new group, if you will, to be able to be granted these exploratory licenses for lobster. I think that whatever the status of the individual is, or they're part of an association that's recognized in, we also made suggestions to DFO to review the processes used. I think there were people on the ground who were listening, and when I say on the ground, I mean in the Gaspé sector, So whether it's an issue of a recognized association or not, we try to get the most information possible. I understand your point. I don't have much time left, and I'd like to ask Mr. Bonachez a question. I want to give you 30 seconds to talk. Or you've raised the idea of the transferability of these exploratory licenses, and you also, I'd like to hear what you have as an idea. Well, in fact, we know that the mid and long-term interest is that everything goes well and the resource continues to stand up. They're not permits that will remain to be exploratory. We're imagining a commercial fishery someday, and I think Mr. Bonachez sees it the same way I do, whether they're exploratory or commercial. I think, does DFO really be able to disallow the transferability of it? If they were able to do that and pass it along to a new generation, for example, that might present a nice way of doing things differently with the next generation. So you're saying that the permit or the license would become commercial, but it doesn't have a value attached to it, and DFO could reassign it. What do you think of that suggestion, Mr. Bonachez? Well, if I understand the Fisheries Act, any license that is given to a fisher remains the property of DFO and must be returned to the department when the person has ceased their activities. So, and over the years, there were transfers that were made between fishermen with the approval of DFO. In the case that we're concerned with currently, regardless of how you define the license, whether it's permanent, exploratory, or other, the important thing is at least to ask the question. If that license is attached to a resource that's supposed to be belong to all Canadians, do we manage it in the best way possible? So I understand for those who already have licenses, they have one attitude, but in the future, if we could ensure that these assistance measures could be transferable from one business to another that's in difficulty, we can't know when a business that's going well will suddenly find itself in trouble. And so that if you had the Zone 12 crab license, one day it's going well, but you don't know what can happen. That can change overnight. So the day that that happens, and the impact that it has on these various communities around the Gulf, if we had at least some discussions already underway for a mechanism to put into place, it might help us to experience the crises that we will see in the future, because there will be some. Thank you, Mr. Deschênes.
First round of questioning. Moving next to the 5-minute round, Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for our witnesses, all of you. I'm going to carry along a little bit longer or further on Mr. Kamal's line of questioning or around the influence of the ENGOs in the decision-making process at DFO. I'll start with Mr. Gallant. Are you aware of influence in your area? Has this always been the case? And if so, if not, when did you feel it started?
It was, Mr. Arnold was never, at least at eyesight, for the majority of my career, and it's seemingly the last, well, really here in the Gulf, it's been since this red fishery has gotten to the level to what it is today, that it garnered interest from these ENGOs, and I guess it's just a part of their mandate to be seen and heard.
Mr. Bonachez, has this influence been there for a length of time, or?
Hand it back over to you. I paused the time here. So
Okay.
I've been in the industry for 5 years, so I don't have a whole lot of experience with NGO or ENGOs. But I'll just repeat what I said before. I think that there's enough intelligent people around the tables when we have the advisory committees or other meetings that we have with DFO to be able to make the best possible decisions for the resource and also for the coastal communities.
And Mr. Boucher?
C'est certain qu'on constate leur présence dans les différents comités consultatifs.
Yes, we can see that now they sit in different advisory committees, but what is their true influence on decisions that are taken? It's hard to say. But I agree with Mr. Bonacci on this. I think that people who sit around the table in those committees should be able to take the best decision possible without undue influence from outside.
How long have you been involved, and have you seen a change in the influence over time?
Je suis dans les pêches depuis.
I'm in the fishing sector now for 10 years, and I think they've been there in the past 5 years. But what true influence do they have is difficult to say, but that we do notice that they are there now.
Thank you. I'll start with Mr. Bernacchi.
J'aimerais m'adresser à M. Bernacchi. Je ne sais pas qui peut vraiment répondre à ma question. Y a-t-il d'autres facteurs qui...
Or redfish? Are there other factors, other predators competing for the same redfish food? For example, are pinnipeds preying on shrimp and reducing the shrimp numbers? Are other stocks...
Yeah, you'll often find 3 species at the same place, let's say. You have redfish, you have Greenland halibut, and you have the Nordic shrimp. So these are like integrated together. The 2 species of fish will prey on the Nordic shrimp. The relation between Greenland halibut and redfish, I could not talk about it. I don't know what it is. But I'll say one thing. There's a plate with sandwich behind here for about 10 people. We're 30 in the room. If we all had to eat on the same plate, you know, there wouldn't be enough for everybody. It's kind of the same thing in the water. There's probably not enough food for all the redfish that's there because it's the most important biomass in the St. Lawrence for now. And a witness before was talking about the effect on one of the other. In 2021, the FOPO data was saying that the year before, redfish had eaten 213,000 tons of shrimp that season, when the quota was roughly 15,000 tons of shrimp.
Okay. From what you've heard from your members, were the license and quota allocations decisions based on science and data, or were they politically based?
You're talking about the redfish?
The redfish, if that's all you were involved with, but also the lobster exploratory license.
Well, when we had the advisory committee about the redfish, it was presented to us that the quota could be for the next year anywhere between 88,000 tons to 318,000 tons. The end result was 60,000 tons. But at the same time, we're saying, all the witnesses, that the most that was caught last year was roughly 32 or 3,200,000 tons. I don't want to be mistaken. So there's more fish and more quota than can be fished, not because we cannot fish, but because there's no one to buy it.
Thank you.
Mr. Arnold. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Connors for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Gallant, glad we have an Amber Alert. We good? Yeah, Mr. Gallant, glad to see another Newfoundland perspective here from the inshore fishery. Glad to hear at the committee and your input, to give your input on this study that we're doing. We had someone from the offshore, so I'm glad to see the inshore perspective. I want to talk about the quota. We've heard testimony that it was only around 3,200 tons of the 60,000 ton TAC that was caught last year, or probably around 34 this year. Is there any reason why you want to see that? Why the quota is not being caught, the full amount of TAC is not being caught?
I think it really comes down to the viability of an enterprise and the profit margins. Right now, the way that the market is portrayed, I mean, you're catching a 25, 27-cent fish, and with the expenses that's incurred at an enterprise today, is you would need a 3 or 4 million pound just to keep a 65-foot vessel and its crew occupied for the season. So, you know, between the market and the amount of quota that's being issued to each individual enterprise is unsustainable. It's very, very unviable. Its profit is well, far too distant.
So, and I agree with you from your previous statements about the hype from a few years ago about the redfish. But one of the problems that happened, I don't think, and I'm not sure who can control it, is that the fish are not growing to the size to be marketable. And that's probably why they're only 25, 30-cent fish. Do you see any reason why that would be the reason or for the reason why they're not growing to a size that would be marketable and probably get a better price?
I would think, you know, not knowing all the parameters that is making up the environmental aspects in the Gulf region, any time you have a species of any animal, predator or prey, there's only so much the ecosystem can withstand before nature starts looking after its surroundings. And in this case, I guess the redfish are that abundant that they are not only eating other species of fish, they're eating themselves. I was speaking to a processor here last week, and the buttocks of the redfish contain herring, capelin, and juvenile redfish. So, I mean, it's to a point, I guess the biomass got to such a level that it has to eat. It doesn't matter what's in front of it. I don't imagine any fish species has a particular palate when it comes to the entree for tonight. If it's going to consume more calories than it expels catching the prey that's in front of it, well, then it's going to try to eat it. And I guess this is to the point of where the stock got to where it was, and to the point of where it's going to today, and it's sort of holding back the size that it's able to grow.
Okay, so using your analysis there of why they're not growing, we're sort of in a catch-22. They're not big enough for the market, so we need to find, I guess, to diversify the markets or something. Do you see anywhere where markets could be diversified so quotas can be probably increased to make it profitable for businesses like yourself?
Well, right now, in particular, any pot fishery, lobsters, crab, in particular, here in Atlantic Canada, I mean, you know, we have a vast number of harvesters that partake in lobster fishery and crab fisheries. The size that this redfish is now, it makes for perfect bait. You couldn't ask for any better. It stands up well. It's attractive to the lobsters and the crab. So, I mean, that alone is a massive market. And, I mean, that's only here in Atlantic Canada. There's pot fishers globally. And I would imagine it'd be quite attractive as a lower cost bait for those fisheries.
Okay, and do you feel like that you would get better than 25, 30 cents a pound for fish if it was sold as bait?
Sir, I fish lobsters in the spring of the year. I'm paying right now 90 cents a pound for that same very redfish.
Et on va terminer avec M. Deschênes pour 2 minutes et demie.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur. We'll start with Mr. Deschênes for 2.5 minutes. The discussion that you launched about transferring the licenses, and you said that the conditions shouldn't be set in stone. Could you say a bit more to my colleague's question if you think that the crab allocations in the south of the Gaspé should be shared? You answered that that was a delicate question, but you also said perhaps we might have to look at the possibility of transfers. So are you thinking of the exploratory licenses being transferable, or the crab ones just being part of the tools that DFO can use to compensate in other or circumstances? Well, I think in general, whether it's crab quotas or exploratory lobster permits, I think we could talk about quotas for other species and other associations around the Gulf as well. In the past, there were measures that were offered to different associations to help them, so either to help their harvesters to get through tough times, and that's what I'm suggesting that we look at through what already exists and what could be. I think we should at least be asking ourselves the question, is that resource, which has a dollar figure on it, we should be saying what's the best way to use it. It's not an idea of taking anything away from anyone, but just at least to ask ourselves the question, what can we do differently with those allocations that are available? And you would include all of that, anything in that. Yes, absolutely, because you can't deal with a specific subject. You really have to take the time to have a big overview. Well, for the exploratory licenses that were allocated, if over the next few years we see, for example, the shrimp stocks increasing, is that something that DFO should be checking on, for example, to see if those shrimpers could come back and get new quotas? Well, it could be part of the whole discussion. We can't take a specific example and try to solve these problems one at a time. We need to have a discussion that's much more broad than that. When we get too much into details, we end up looking at results that would be difficult. So thank you, Mr. Deschênes. I'm sorry, but that wraps up our second panel.
For joining today in person and by video conferences. And thank you for your testimony. This is going to be very, very helpful as we finalize the report and put together recommendations for the government to act upon. But with that, we are going to briefly suspend before we move into in-camera to take care of some business.
you.